It's that time of year again where Brandon releases his State of Sanderson on or around his birthday of December 19th, also known as Koloss Head-muching Day. For those of you unfamiliar with the State of Sanderson, this is a document Brandon types up to inform us of his future plans as well as recapping the prior year for us. Brandon himself has already said that he will be releasing a video version of this, but I figured in the meantime I could quickly summarize everything revealed in the State of Sanderson 2023. Brandon begins by saying how next year will be a year to slow things down. He is satisfied with the quality of the products released in the year of Sanderson, but he doesn't want to follow it up with another year, worried that the quality would diminish over time. It would seem at first glance that the year of Sanderson is a one and done. Except, as a side note, Brandon does mention how they could try something similar in the future. Although it is unclear whether he is referring to a subscription box, the secret projects, or both. Next year, though, he says that instead of releasing 5 books, he will just be focused on releasing Stormlight Archive 5. But he goes on to say how the Words of Radiance leather-bound crowdfunding campaign on BackerKit will go live on March 5th, in that Brotherwise Games will be releasing their Stormlight Archive tabletop role-playing game towards the end of the year. Brotherwise goes on to say how the game will come with 3 book releases, a core rule book, the rule guide featuring artwork, and an unannounced book. Brandon discusses how his entire year was spent writing Stormlight 5, officially titled Wind and Truth, apart from January, in which he was finishing revisions for Defiant. Brandon goes on to say how everything is looking good for Wind and Truth, but his next phase will be revisions, which is the most difficult part for him. Hopefully, nothing will prevent it getting delayed from its scheduled December 6, 2024 release date. Brandon begins by saying how his planned Stormlight Horneater novella will not be included in the Words of Radiance leatherbound campaign, and that he will instead likely write it in between his Mistborn Era 3 books as a sort of break, of which he plans to begin writing the Ghostbloods Era 3 series starting January 1st, 2025, either back-to-back or interspersed between his 2 Elantris sequels. Brandon goes on to say how he will not be releasing any of the Era 3 or Elantris sequels until after they are all written. For what is assumed timeline reasons, perhaps they are intertwined by a major event or extensive character crossovers. During this time frame, Stormlight Archive, minus the Horneater novella, will be on a long hiatus. Brandon continues by saying how pleased he is with the reception of his Defiant book and how the sequel series is being handled by Jancy Patterson following his outline. Jancy then interjects saying how she has finished the rough draft and will be tackling revisions soon. The first book, tentatively titled Blightfall, will follow Sadie and Arturo. Brandon mentions how the secret project books for now are intended to be standalones, even if some of the characters will pop up again. He doesn't confirm there will never be a sequel to any of them, it's just not currently planned. Brandon talks of how his co-written book with Peter Arulian, titled Songs of the Dead, starring an American necromancer living in London, is essentially ready to be published. That being said, Brandon goes on to say how he will not be involved with this book or its sequels any further. There is no bad blood between him and the other author, it's just Brandon has realized that in order to get the Cosmere done, he can't focus on any other non-Cosmere series outside of his Cytoverse series. In July 2024, Brandon intends to continue working on his definitive White Sand prose version, previously only published as a graphic novel, and hopes to be able to release it at Dragonsteel 2025. For those unfamiliar, White Sand acts as a sort of origin story for Chris, who is a very important character in the Cosmere. Dan then interjects to talk about his and Brandon's semi-delayed Dark One novel, originally intended as a trilogy. Dan sheds some light on his suffering from depression having slowed progress, but is optimistic of the work and quality of the book. It is intertwined in some way to the Dark One Forgotten audio-only project released a while back. Last on the secondary projects list is Super Awesome Danger, which Brandon refers to as Secret Project Zero. For his initial Secret Project reveal video, he mentioned a 5th manuscript. This lighthearted manuscript is based on his children, one of which drew a picture of what will now be a character in the graphic novel named Robog, who is half frog, half robot. In the graphic novel, one brother invents a video game and presumably, accidentally, traps the other brother inside it. Brandon begins this section by shattering our hopes and dreams and saying how there is no momentum on sequels to Arithmetist or Warbreaker. The Reckoners, which I'm not at all familiar with, Brandon mentions how Stephen Bowles is interested in continuing. The original, which I'm also not super familiar with, continues to be neglected, and Brandon mentions we might get an ebook of eventually. Both Dan and Isaac's Cosmere books, the latter featuring the character Nikki Savage, have made progress, but it is slow going. Brandon then goes on to tease us with future Cosmere books he might one day write. The Night Brigade, briefly teased in The Sunlit Man, Dragonsteel, Hoyd's origin story, The Silence Divine, The Grand Apparatus, which I believe is a new edition, Mythos, which is referenced in the Lost Metal, and the Aetherworld book series. Brandon mentions how the Mistborn film had been in development but is now on pause, and that he hopes he can share more in 2024. The wording on this makes it seem like the film could still happen, which is odd because during his Dragonsteel 2023 speech, he made it seem much more dead. So I'm not entirely sure what to think, but I'm going to keep my hopes in check for now. He also says how everything else, presumably Cosmere related, is on hold despite interest while he thinks about strategy. Which, purely me speculating, I think this means the offers he had been getting were either not enough money to do his works justice, or more likely that they weren't wanting to invest into the Cosmere as a whole, but instead wanting to buy his works individually. And based on what Brandon has mentioned publicly, he seems very interested in someone to partner with for the entire Cosmere. Although this theory of mine makes the whole Mistborn film thing even more confusing. Now you may have noticed that I skipped over part 7, which featured members of Dragonsteel giving updates, but nothing was really revealed during this segment. In part 8, Brandon gives us what he assumes will be his book release plans for the foreseeable future, but stresses that predicting this can be difficult and that it will most certainly change. Due to needing to write all the Era 3 and Elantris books together means there will be a bit of a drought for Cosmere content over the next 5 years. This does mean, though, that after the drought we will then be flooded with Cosmere novels, which will be awesome. The schedule as of now goes as follows. December 2024, Stormlight 5, Wind and Truth. Spring 2025, Skyward Legacy 1. December 2025, White Sand Novel and Dark One. Spring 2026, Skyward Legacy 2. December 2026, Skyward Legacy 3. December 2026, Horneater. December 2027, to be announced. December 2028, Ghostbloods 1, Summer 2029, Elantris 2, December 2029, Ghostbloods 2, Summer 2030, Elantris 3, December 2030, Ghostbloods 3. Brandon mentions how Dan and Isaac's Cosmere books will drop sometime within this window, along with Super Awesome Danger. Now, as you probably have already noticed, this means that the earliest we could see a Stormlight 6 is between 2032 and 2034, depending on when he can begin writing it while finishing up Era 3 and the Elantris sequels. Which means, in theory, there will be an entire decade without a mainline Stormlight release. Honestly though, if the secret projects have proved anything, it's that Brandon is a pretty fast writer. So I remain hopeful that I won't be 40 when I'm reading Stormlight 6.
Stormlight 6, come on. I'm neck deep in Stormlight 5. Stormlight 6 is probably 10 years away. Just read the state of the Sanderson. Prime yourself for that. That is my expectation, but we'll see.
In Part 9, Brandon acknowledges what is going on with his overseas publishers. In Part 10, Brandon assures us that despite everything going on, he does still maintain a healthy life balance, which is good because we're only halfway through the Cosmere and we don't want Brandon getting burnt out anytime soon. So that pretty much concludes the State of Sanderson 2023. While there weren't as many surprises in here as I was hoping, I do appreciate having an updated timeline for what to expect after Wind and Truth. Getting Era 3 and the Elantris sequels back to back is going to make for an exciting couple of years. In the meantime, consider subscribing to the channel for more Cosmere invested content. Until next time.